Okay, during the course I'm asking you to do a fair amount of critical reading, thinking, and writing. So what I'd like to do here is to look at a page, and I picked one randomly from the Introduction to Fiction section, and look at how I have marked my book and what I pulled out of this, and hopefully this will kind of spur you to think, how am I reading? Could I be more of an active reader? Would annotations or making notes help me? And if so, how can I go about doing that? So at the very top, you'll notice that I made a note to myself, novella led to short story. And the reason why I made that note is because there are several paragraphs that kind of relate to that. I summarized the main points of the first paragraph that's listed here, and then also some of the materials on the previous page as well. Now, part of the beauty of this for me is the idea that I already know what a novella is, right? I know where that comes from. I know what its historical background is, so I didn't need to make a lot of notes to myself about that. But the idea that the short story didn't just come about, that it evolved, I thought that was significant, so I made myself a note. In this paragraph, I really didn't do a very great job of taking notes because I just underlined things. And as you can see, there's a lot less significance when you just underline. I have to go back through and reread the words. So up here at the top, when I made my note about the novella, it's far more interactive. It's more intuitive because I don't have to reread a whole bunch of stuff. Nonetheless, the point that I was trying to make in the second paragraph, or this first full paragraph to myself, was the idea that the short story evolves into this specific literary genre. It's not a version of something, it is its own section, right? That's what genre is. It's its own type of literature. And what I thought was really interesting here is the notion that the U.S. actually led this charge. And you think about, when you think about literature, a lot of times, certainly we think about things that we had to read in high school or you know, things along those lines, and many of those people are American. However, you think about like Shakespeare, you think about a lot of English people, you think about, you know, different nationalities. So the idea that the U.S. led the way, I thought was really fascinating. I also really enjoyed this section down here about how, especially American writers, wrote prolifically about how, as they say here, the short story is as carefully shaped as a sonnet. When you think about a sonnet in the form, maybe you've had to write a sonnet at some point in your life, we'll be reading some later on in the semester, it has a very specific amount of lines. You have very particular syllables within the lines. You know, your words have to have certain cadence to them. So along those lines, you know, sometimes I think I certainly run into fiction short stories and I think, when are you going to stop your rambling, right? Like, focus. And what these writers are arguing, Hawthorne and Poe specifically, is the idea that it's not rambling at all, that everything that's in a short story is there for a specific purpose. And when you start reading with that thinking, it's a game changer. Right? Instead of skimming through something where you're like, there's no action here, this is all just description, I'm not in love with it. So instead of going through and just sort of like having an overview of that kind of moment, you look at it and you really start diving into it a little bit more. This idea down here, I've put a star next to it, that's just my personal note-taking. And I encourage each of you to figure out how you take notes best about the difficulty in crafting the short story. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do well, especially the shorter the story is, because it's hard to get that evolution of character. It's hard to show all the plot movement with depth, with a sense of realism, all these things. And then you know, I focused in on this notion of tale, and then I made a note to myself that there are more genres. You can see my pen bled through from the next page where I made notes. But the idea of tale as being such an important moment, especially in U.S. writing, because it is something different than the ordinary. And, you know, that in and of itself, the exotic, the supernatural, things that are outside of our expectation, you're going to see a lot of that in the readings that I've chosen for you in this first unit primarily because I think it keeps you interested, and you know, it's something that's very specifically related to short story. So my hope here in showing you this page out of the Introduction to Fiction section that I have marked is just to show you the idea of active reading. Too often, I think people get through a reading assignment and you say to yourself, well, I've read every word, but I have no idea what it meant. When you read actively, you don't have that problem because, just as I've been demonstrating here, you make connections with the text. And in making those connections, it gives it more meaning, right? It gives it more significance. So I want to encourage everybody, try and find this meaning within your text. Certainly, I own this book, so I can write in it. Some of you don't want to keep your book, are renting a book, whatever it is. You can do the same, a very similar activity in taking notes on your own. There are note-taking methods. One of your challenges as a college student is to come up with a note-taking strategy that really works for you. So this might be your moment to figure that out. And if you already have it kind of worked out, this is your time to refine it. I wish you all well. Happy reading.